Hello. Come in. And gently with the door tonight, if you would. It's one of those rare, still evenings where I find myself not wanting to disturb a single thing. No rain tonight, no wind either. The sky's gone perfectly clear over the meadow, and the stars are out in such numbers that the river's taken to copying them. I stood at the window earlier, and honestly couldn't tell you where the sky stopped and the water began. The whole world out there looks like it's been doubled, which is a funny thing, as it happens, because of what I have here in my lap. A sailor came through this library once, a long while back now, and stayed 3 nights by that fire, which is longer than most stay. She left me 2 travel journals as her thank you, and tucked between them, folded small, a story. Not from the journals, written separately, on different paper, in a steadier hand, as though the journals were where she kept what happened, and this was where she kept what mattered. I've held onto it a good while, waiting for the right sort of night to read it. And then this evening, I looked out at that doubled-up sky over the meadow, and I thought, well, there it is. That's the night. So take whichever seat suits you. The chair by the fire is warmest, but the little sofa near the window has the view, and I'll not pretend I don't know which one I'd pick. Pull something soft around your shoulders. Let the day set itself down by the door where it belongs. This one is called Sailing Among the Sea of Stars. And I think it may be the quietest story I own. Ellie had always believed the world was too big to see from just one place. She'd believed it as a girl, lying in the back garden while her mother pointed out constellations, tracing bears and hunters and queens against the dark with one finger, while Ellie squinted and tilted her head, and never once managed to see anything up there but stars, beautiful and stubbornly shapeless. She'd believed it through all the ordinary years that followed, the ones spent in rooms and streets and routines that fit her well enough, but never quite perfectly, the way a borrowed coat fits. And so, when the time finally came, she did the simplest and most enormous thing she could think of. She sold what she didn't need, which turned out to be nearly everything, kept only what would fit aboard a small boat, and set out to sail around the world, slowly, one horizon at a time. The boat was called Tranquility, and Ellie had named her for the water she loved best, the calm, glassy kind, the kind that barely makes a sound against the hull, the kind most sailors find boring, and Ellie could watch for hours. Tranquility wasn't fast, and she wasn't fancy. Her sails had faded from years of sun, from white to a soft, weathered cream, and there was a smooth groove worn into the wooden wheel where Ellie's hands had rested 10,000 times without her ever once noticing she was wearing it there. The cabin below held a narrow bunk, a small stove, a shelf of much-read books held in place by a strip of old sailcloth, and very little else. But Tranquility was steady. She rode out weather twice her size and came up level every time. And steady, Ellie had learned, was worth more than fast and fancy put together. Together, the two of them had gone further than Ellie had ever quite planned to go. They'd crossed grey northern seas where the fog sat on the water for days, and the foghorns called to each other like patient animals. They'd run warm southern currents where flying fish burst out of the bow wave in little silver handfuls. They'd passed cliffs of white chalk and beaches of black volcanic sand, and anchored off little fishing towns where the smell of wood smoke drifted out over the harbour at dusk, and someone was always mending a net, and nobody was ever in a hurry. Ellie kept a notebook of all of it, a small one, its cover gone soft, its pages curled and swollen from years of salt air. The places, she called it, though it held more than places. Sketches of harbours, the names of boats she'd liked, a recipe for fish stew a harbour master's wife had made her copy down before she was allowed to leave. On good days, she wrote in it faithfully. Though, if she was honest, and out at sea, with no one to perform for, she generally was. Most nights, she was too tired to write. Or too happy. It was surprising how often those came to the same thing. She had grown used to the rhythms of a life afloat, the way you grow used to a language until one day you realize you've been dreaming in it. The creak of rope against the mast, the particular blue of the ocean at midday, and the way it deepened toward evening into something closer to ink. She could read clouds the way some people read faces, could tell a passing squall from a real storm just by the way the wind changed its mind. She knew the sound of her own hull so well that a new creak woke her from a dead sleep, and a familiar one lulled her back down again. And she had learned patience. That was the sea's first lesson, and its longest. The ocean did not hurry for anyone. After enough years, neither did she. Tonight, she was somewhere she couldn't quite have named on a map. A stretch of open ocean far from any coastline, further out than she usually bothered to sail, further from land than she'd been in a long while. The water out here had gone the colour of ink, and the sky had opened itself into thousands upon thousands of stars, more appearing the longer she looked, the way stars do, as though shyness wears off them in stages. She had been sailing since late afternoon, watching the light drain slowly out of the west, orange, then rose, then violet, then a deep and endless blue that never quite finished becoming black. And somewhere in that long fading, she had made a small decision, the kind that doesn't feel like a decision at all when you make it. She wasn't going to make for any harbour tonight. There was nowhere she needed to be. There was no one waiting, no tide to catch, no weather coming. She'd read the clouds at sunset, and the clouds had had nothing to say. So she loosened the sails, lashed the wheel, and simply let tranquility drift, going wherever the gentle current cared to take them both. She switched off the little cabin light. She wanted nothing between herself and the sky tonight. No warm yellow glowed to shrink the dark down to the size of a boat. The moon hadn't risen, or perhaps it wasn't rising at all tonight. She couldn't remember, and found she didn't want to work it out. Without it, the stars had the whole sky entirely to themselves. She had never seen so many. They didn't just fill the sky. They came all the way down to the water on every side, right down to where the horizon ought to be, so that the horizon itself blurred and softened and quietly gave up, and boat and sky and sea all seemed to belong to the same vast unhurried dark. Ellie curled up at the bow with a blanket around her shoulders and her feet tucked beneath her, and for a long while she did nothing at all. She watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, the way they always did, unhurried, like they had nowhere else to be because they didn't. The sea lay calm around her, barely a ripple, as if it too were resting, as if the whole ocean had decided to hold itself still tonight so as not to disturb the peace of it. Even tranquillity's usual creak and sway had gentled into something softer, lesser sound than a rocking, lesser rocking than a lullaby. Her thoughts drifted the way the boat was drifting, loose, unhurried, going nowhere in particular, and in no rush to arrive there. She thought of her mother in the back garden, tracing queens in the sky. She could almost hear her. There, Ellie, the 3 bright ones, that's her crown. And she smiled to herself in the dark, because she still couldn't see the crown. She'd sailed half the world under these stars, and they had never once looked like anything to her, but exactly what they were. She'd long ago decided that was its own way of loving them. She thought of her first night ever sleeping aboard, years and years ago now, in a harbour so sheltered the water might as well have been a pond, lying rigid in the bunk, listening to every unfamiliar creak as though the boat were deciding whether to keep her, and how somewhere in the small hours exhaustion had won, and she'd woken to gulls and sunlight and the smell of someone else's breakfast, and known with the whole of herself that she was home. She thought of nothing much at all for a while, which was its own kind of pleasant. Somewhere off to her left, a fish broke the surface, a small silver flicker, a soft splash, and the quiet folded itself back over the water as though nothing had happened. A little further off, something larger moved beneath the surface, a slow shadow, there and then gone, leaving one faint ripple to say it had passed. Ellie watched the ripple fade and felt no fear at all. Out here, fear had a way of loosening its grip. There was only the boat and the water and the great slow wheel of stars going about their ancient business overhead, carrying on exactly as they had long before she was born, exactly as they would long after. On land, a thought like that could make a person feel small in the worrying way. Out here it made her feel small in the other way, the relieved way, the way that means none of it is yours to hold up. You can set it down. You can rest. The air smelled of salt, and of something faintly sweet underneath it that she'd never once managed to name, something that only seemed to be there on the calmest nights, as though the sea kept it put away for special occasions. She pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders and tipped her head back, letting her eyes wander from one drift of stars to the next, not looking for anything, just enjoying the looking. It was the quiet that made her notice. Not a sound, the opposite of a sound, a change in the water itself, a softness spreading somewhere beneath the surface, so subtle she almost took it for a trick of starlight, a sense, more than a sight, that something enormous and gentle, somewhere far below, had just let out a breath it had been holding a very long time. Ellie sat up. She leaned over the rail and peered down into water so dark that a moment ago it might as well have been the night sky's spare. And there, far, far down, where there should have been nothing at all, was a light. Then not one light, hundreds, maybe thousands. She blinked hard, certain her tired eyes were playing tricks, the way they sometimes did after a long day of sun on water. But the lights only grew clearer, rising, drifting gently upward from somewhere deeper than she could imagine, soft and pale and patient, like something out of a dream she hadn't realized she was in the middle of having. Jellyfish. More jellyfish than she had ever imagined could gather in one place, each one glowing a soft blue-green, pulsing gently, rising past tranquillity's hull in a slow, unbothered procession. They came up out of the deep the way snow falls, only backwards, and lit the water from below exactly the way the stars lit the sky from above. Ellie had seen jellyfish glow before, small clusters in shallow harbour water, a faint shimmer around a dock piling. Never like this, never so many, never so far from any shore, in water this deep, on a night this dark. She held her breath, and for a long, suspended moment, she genuinely could not tell where the sky ended and the sea began. Stars above her, scattered, silver, endless and still. Jellyfish below her, drifting, glowing, endless and slow. And tranquility resting quietly between the two, as though she had wandered, entirely by accident, into some secret place that belonged to neither the sky nor the sea, but to both at once. A place stitched together out of two different kinds of light. Ellie had spent years chasing horizons, and here, tonight, the horizon had simply dissolved, and she was floating in the middle of what was left. She sat perfectly still. She was afraid, the only fear the whole night offered her, and a gentle one, that any sudden movement might end it, the way dreams end the moment you reach for them. But the jellyfish kept coming, more and more of them, rising from somewhere unseen, filling the water on every side until the entire ocean around the little boat had come, quietly, softly, alive. She trailed her fingers just above the surface, not touching, only near, and watched the light shift and ripple beneath her hand with every small movement of the current. Some of the jellyfish brightened as they passed beneath the hull, little slow-motion bursts, like fireflies that had come up from the bottom of the ocean instead of out of a summer field. Others glowed so faintly, she had to look twice to be sure of them at all. Pale ghosts of light hovering just under the skin of the water. Some passed close enough that she could make out the fine lines within each glowing bell, delicate, intricate, like veins of light traced beneath frosted glass. Others kept their distance, scattered wide across the dark water, small constellations of their own, blinking softly in and out as they pulsed. And every so often, two of them would drift near enough to almost touch, and where they met, the light seemed to brighten, just for a moment, just between the two of them. Like a small quiet greeting passed in a language made entirely of glow, before the current eased them apart again and carried each one on its way. There was no urgency in any of it. They didn't dart or startle the way fish did when a hull passed over. They simply drifted exactly as she had been drifting, going wherever the slow current carried them, entirely unbothered by the small wooden boat resting above, as though a boat full of wonder was simply one more thing the ocean occasionally contained. The longer Ellie watched, the more she began to feel a rhythm in it, an unhurried pulse moving through the whole glowing gathering of them, brightening and dimming, like the ocean itself was breathing, slow and deep and in time, with something far older than she had a name for. And she found, after a while, that her own breathing had slowed to match it. She hadn't decided to. It had simply happened, the way your footsteps fall in with a friend's. She thought, then, breathing with the sea. About everywhere tranquility had carried her, the noisy harbours crowded with fishing boats and quarrelling gulls, the empty coastlines where she hadn't seen another soul for days and hadn't missed one, the storms she'd waited out, white-knuckled at the wheel, rain coming sideways, the whole world reduced to the next wave and the one after it. And the calm mornings she'd woken into afterwards, wrung out and grateful, watching the sun climb back over a sea that had spent the whole night pretending to be her enemy, and now lay there sparkling, all innocence, as though nothing had happened at all. She had chased so much across so many miles, new coastlines, new harbours, always the next horizon, always, faithfully, the next one. But she wasn't chasing anything tonight. Tonight, for once, she had simply stopped. And the world had come and found her instead. And it had brought her this, a sea full of quiet light, a sky just as full above it, and herself, resting gently in between the two, asked to do nothing at all but witness it. Perhaps, she thought, that was the whole secret, and it had taken her half an ocean to learn it. Not the chasing, the stopping, moving softly when you moved, resting fully when you rested, and trusting that the current knew its business, that wherever it was carrying you was somewhere worth arriving. She thought briefly of her notebook, down in the cabin, on its shelf behind the strip of old sailcloth, its soft pages waiting for exactly a night like this one. It was the sort of thing the notebook was for. But she didn't move. She didn't want to break the stillness, even for the half minute it would take. And besides, something in her had begun to understand that certain things are better left unwritten, better kept whole and private, and a little beyond words, held the way you hold a good dream after waking, turning it over gently rather than pinning it down. The notebook had the places. This could just be hers. So she watched. She watched for a long, long time, long enough that she gave up all track of how long, as the great glowing procession drifted on beneath her. And then, slowly, gradually, the way a crowd thins after a gathering, nobody wants to be first to leave, the jellyfish began to sink away. Fewer and fewer, fainter and fainter, sinking back down toward whatever deep, patient place they had risen from, carrying their small borrowed lights along with them, until the last soft glow dimmed into the dark and was gone. The water lay black and still again. The horizon stayed dissolved. The stars, patient as ever, kept the whole enormous sky. And Ellie found she didn't mind at all. She understood, without needing to reason it out, that she'd been given something rare tonight. Some other sailor might cross this same stretch of ocean tomorrow and see nothing but dark water. She had happened to be here, and happened to stop, and happened to look over the rail at exactly the right moment. That was all. That was everything. She pulled the blanket in tighter, feeling small and lucky in equal measure, tucked safely between two skies that had, for one long unhurried hour, opened themselves up just for her. Beneath her, tranquility rocked gently on, steady as she had always been, keeping her quiet watch. The same watch she'd kept through every harbour and every storm, and every calm and glowing night of their long acquaintance. Before long, Ellie's eyes grew heavy, lulled down by the soft creak of the boat, by the whisper of water along the hull, by the slow rhythm still moving somewhere in her chest, brightening and dimming, brightening and dimming. Overhead, the stars kept their patient turn. Somewhere far below, the jellyfish continued their own quiet journey, drifting on toward wherever it was they were going, in no hurry at all to get there. And Ellie curled up right there at the bow, blanket to her chin, the notebook still resting unopened on its shelf below. and let the stars above her and the memory of the glow beneath her carry her gently, gently down into sleep. Tranquility rocked her, soft and slow, steady and unhurried, as she had always been. There. I'll fold it back up small, the way she left it, and keep it safe between the journals where it lives. I think what I like best is the notebook, that she left it closed. Not everything needs writing down or holding on to. Some nights are simply for being in, and this can be one of yours. And you know, I don't think I'll light the lamp tonight. It seems a shame to, on a night like this one. The stars are doing all the work out there, coming right down through the window and laying themselves across the floor. And Ellie switched her little light off for less. So, we'll let the sky keep watch for once. It's had rather a lot of practice. Good night.